Anyway, one of the most popular gags would be we'd build up a jump and then we'd send somebody to go test it. It was often me, and the person would ride off, make sure they got enough speed, and then as that person had their back turned riding away, you'd move the plastic jump a little further away from the landing, and then... So I grew up in the early 2000s, in a pretty suburban neighborhood over in Michigan. We had lots of neighborhood kids, similar age and similar mindsets. And where a lot of our play happened was this place we called The Woods. It was a kind of a half lot that still had all the trees up that would have been the whole neighborhood before they built all the houses. And in there is where we did a lot of our playtime. So included lots of rambunctious things like shooting each other with airsoft guns, hitting golf balls through the trees. Built a fort one time that the township didn't really like, but that's a whole nother story. But being the early 2000s, one of our main activities was biking, particularly dirt BMX. 2000s action sports were all the rage. Big deal. I distinctly remember watching Travis Pastrana land the first double backflip on a dirt bike. Snowboard halfpipe was new to the Olympics, very controversial, but Shaun White won gold and became a national hero. It was all a big deal, so we bought into it in the neighborhood. So we built lots of jumps for our bikes. Often, it was just a somewhat formed pile of dirt, and then one of those black plastic ramps that you'd buy at the store, and you just adjust the distance from the ramp to the landing to taste. And, you know, we destroyed lots of bikes. We really got into tail whips, where you'd try to kick the tail of the bike out midair. We never did the second half of that, where we bring it back in line to land the jump. Instead, we just landed somewhat sideways and hope we'd ride out. Resulted in lots of very unround rear wheels on our bicycles that made them really unpleasant to ride, except in that particular setting. So I remember one time I landed sideways just enough where I was lined up right for a tree, hit the tree head on, and it actually bent the steer tube inside of the bike, rendering it totaled. It was my first totaled vehicle, we'll call it. There was another one that came later that was a real car, but that's another story. Anyway, one of the most popular gags would be we'd build up a jump and then we'd send somebody to go test it. It was often me, and looking back, don't know how I feel about this, but person would ride off, make sure they got enough speed, and then as that person had their back turned riding away, you'd move the plastic jump a little further away from the landing, and then when they'd hit it, it was about 5 feet longer than they had anticipated. And that just created a little bit of like, oh, there's always an unknown that goes with trying the jump for the first time. A, we don't know how good it's actually gonna work as designed, let alone how well it's gonna work with the added dimension of how far did my friends move the jump from the landing? Often it would work out okay. Sometimes, the front wheel wouldn't quite get over the landing, and then you'd go, over the handlebars, and you'd get hurt, and you'd go home, and you'd swear you'd never come back and play with the kids again, but 48 hours later, here you were with a shovel building more jumps. But it's just a big part of growing up, and definitely learned a lot of that risk, unknown, like, what's it like to go and do something that might not go right? And if it doesn't go right, it's probably going to come at your expense. You're the one who's going to get hurt. And now, working with Youth Dynamics, I often wonder if those feelings I felt biking into jumps for the first time are how some of our students feel when they get tied into a rock climb for the first time or drop into their first big rapid as a paddler. It's all unknown to them. Like, I don't know exactly what they're thinking, but I often wonder if it's similar. I love the quote of John Wesley Powell. He was the explorer who led the first expedition down the Grand Canyon, and he talks about stepping into the great unknown, down an unknown river for an unknown distance. And it's probably one of the most cliche river guide quotes ever, but I do think it encompasses a lot of what we do. And yeah, I think I have to remind myself often at the start of a trip or on top of a rapid that those feelings that I felt at their age in a different setting probably apply to these students, even in a much more controlled setting of adventure. And a key part of our ministry is we tie that unknown. What does it mean to trust a guide, trust an activity, and the unknowns that go with it for a greater outcome? Often feels like what it's like to follow Christ. Like, I know my life has gone all sorts of unknown places as a result of that. I'm here in rural Idaho, someone who grew up in Michigan, who at one point very much confused Idaho and Iowa on the map. I never would have guessed that following Christ and his plan would lead me here. It's a big invite for our young people to invite them to that life of Christ and pursuit of him. We don't know where it's going to go for them. They surely don't know. But can we trust him, his goodness, his infinite plan that we'll never fully understand, to take us on these grand adventures, step into the unknown, and see where it takes us? Ultimately, that's the goal of our ministry. And it's fun to see how that goal, unbeknownst to me, has tied through from when I was a kid doing terrible risk choices on a bicycle to now a little more calculated, but still inviting people into that risk, the unknown. And yeah, we pray for many of our young people who have come through our boats and belay stations, that they step into that next step of adventure and the unknown that goes with following Christ. So we invite you to step into that as well and maybe plan a new adventure yourself. Thanks. Thanks for joining us for Streamside Stories. Click the link to subscribe and join us for more stories and virtual adventures. This isn't the only way we want to adventure together, though. We also want to invite you to come join us for an adventure and create some stories of your own. To do so, head to www.yd.org to connect with us and our basis to start your journey today. Thanks.